Gareth, do you have a peak trans moment?
I had several, I
Okay.
think. um, Looking back, I'm not sure what particularly sent me over the edge. It was lots of little increments, really, which is, the definition of peaking is when one of those increments gets you over the line. I think I thought it was just another one of those kind of student-based kind of crazes that would hopefully fizzle out. And then I'm just trying to think. I think it was. So we're talking about sort of 2015, 2016, really, which was when it really started to become apparent. I think it was. I can't point to a particular thing, looking back on it. I think it was just the accumulation of everything. And then it started to get more and more insane and more obvious and public. But no, I don't think I can actually put a particular incident on it.
Can I tell you mine? I don't think I've ever
Yeah,
said this
go on. Yeah,
publicly.
yeah,
This would be
yeah.
like 2013 maybe, and there was some really silly thing, and I was an undergraduate, and there was some really silly fight at an American university which I came across on Twitter about the students had put on an event called the Night of 1,000 Vaginas, which was kind
This is
of
ringing a bell, actually.
right.
Yeah,
It was kind of vagina monologues-esque
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and they've been accused of transphobia for doing this, and I just found it really, really confusing. It just took me the longest time to kind of get to the heart of what was going on, because I was like, but vaginas are not—they're just an anatomical thing. It's not whatever. And I finally it kind of clicked, and I was like, oh, it is. It's completely inconsistent and crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's not designed
yeah,
to make sense.
yeah,
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 it's a trivial thing in retrospect, but yeah,
yeah,
um, that was my one.
yeah. I think actually, looking back on it now, I think now you've triggered that memory. I think there was something about the Bradley Manning. Was it Bradley Manning, the American soldier who?
Oh, it became Chelsea Manning.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I think a lot of the reaction to that online made me sort of flinch. I was just thinking, but hold on, this is just crazy. So I think that was a large part of it looking back. That was one of the big incidents that made me think, hold on, as you say, no one's looking at this rationally. No one's even, taking the most basic logic to and obvious observable reality about this. Because, they're suddenly saying that, oh, he should be in a women's prison. What? I mean, that's just. But again, with a lot of these things, I think that they sound so crazy that it takes you quite a while to get them into your head, because you think I must be missing something. Because usually you see a headline, it's a crazy story. You think, hold on. You look down, and then you eventually find something. And you go, okay, maybe it's not as crazy as all that, and they've kind of bigged that up with the headline. But with this stuff, I was always looking for that little bit of explanation, and it never came.
So your book is about the homophobia of transgenderism, right? What would you say currently is the sort of standard position among most gay men in relation to this? There's
It's
variation.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really hard to tell, because nobody can speak freely.
Yeah.
I mean, for obvious reasons. So it's really, really hard to tell. And everyone's going by anecdotal evidence and lived experience. The establishment, gay institutions, Stonewall, all those kind of, well, I say gay institutions, LGBTQ plus institutions, as they are now, and the LGBT consortium, all those kind of big bodies and all the corporates, they're very much still on board. They're still going for it hell for leather. Even post Cass review now, I think with the election has sort of helped them to sort of kind of forget that. And we're already seeing, people just sort of carrying on as if nothing much has happened, or trying to get away with that. So I think that on the surface level, it looks like everyone's marching in lockstep, and it's trans, and isn't it fantastic? Now, anecdotally, and again, I've got no statistical evidence for this, but you do get a lot of people, as far as I can say, whispering in corners. You know, there are lots of WhatsApp groups. There are lots of secret gay male turfs, basically, turfing away in corners. I hear occasionally from people all over the place and in quite unlikely places, professionally. I get little messages and things saying, "Oh, I love your book, but I can't say anything." You know, which I'm sure, you know, Helen Joyce, you know, will has told you all about this syndrome where people do that, you know, and that's fine. So it's just incredibly hard to tell, because there does seem to be a lot of groupthink and crime stop thinking and people stopping talking, but on the other hand, there is a certain amount of disquiet, and I think that's growing.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess that it would be right that there is sort of.
Yeah,
I have also had
yeah,
the same
yeah,
private words from, including from gay male friends,
yeah,
who very much. It kind of depends on what line of work you're in, doesn't it? In terms of
yeah.
how free you feel
Very
to
much
say
so.
this.
If you're in the creative sector, which is kind of where I come from originally, which I
Yeah,
get it,
yeah.
you know, that's where you really can't say anything, whoever you are. You know, I mean, I've seen some really quite famous gender-bending male pop stars, gay pop stars of the past, dipping their toe into this and then getting major blowback. And that's crazy. You know, it's sort of... but you can't, whoever you are and whatever your past, whatever you've done, it doesn't matter. You have to completely sign up to the whole shebang. They're not interested in any kind of negotiation or questioning.
Yeah, I mean, until now, I'm sure this is still largely true. The strongest opposition from the LGB community has been from lesbians. Some of that's coming from the feminist critique. I think probably
Yeah,
the more pressing reason has come from the fact that pressure on lesbians to have sexual relationships
yeah,
with organophilic trans women
yeah,
has been quite strong for quite a long time.
yeah, yeah.
Gay men have not had that much pressure, or maybe have
It's starting to
withstood it
come in, I
better.
gather. I mean, my app days, my sort of, those days are long gone, but I have some useful spies and they tell me, you know, it's increasing all the time, that, sort of, a friend of mine was saying to me recently that he was on Grindr or one of those things, and it was kind of about, he estimated it at about being like 1 in 8 of
No,
the people on there was a woman. Yeah.
1 in 8. That's so
Yeah,
high.
he's in the centre of a city, a very urban sort of progressive place with lots of students in it. So maybe it's coming from there, but that is encroaching. I've also seen what's happening is that when you turn the women down, they complain to the Grindr authorities, and you get kicked
I'm sorry, I
off.
shouldn't laugh.
I know. Yeah,
going
yeah,
to the
yeah.
going to the
The
grinder
Ministry of
head
Grindr.
teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is that they sort of get into a little clique and just say, "Oh, I got turned down by him, and I got turned down by him." So then they make their complaint of transphobia, and you just think, but you're a woman and you're on a gay male dating site. It's not rocket science to work this out, you know. So I think there is that. I mean, that this is something that nobody's really talking about, and it's sort of quite fascinating in a way. And obviously, the power dynamic between men and women is so different sexually that it's not coming from a place of actual direct violent threat, which it is from men with women, with lesbians, but it is. I think a lot of gay men just find it baffling. It's sort of they just can't understand it at all. And I think, I say in the book, I mean, my sort of experience of that kind of fetishization of male homosexuality from women is quite, I thought it was quite a minor thing. I didn't think it was an issue, really. I
Mm.
mean, my sort of knowledge of it was based on kind of fan fiction that people used to write, like all that One Direction stuff, where there were lots of teenage girls writing fan fiction about Harry and Larry or whatever they were called. And I thought, well, fair enough. And I think, for some straight people, mostly men, but obviously a few women too, they like to think of the sex that they fancy getting it on together, which is, sort of inevitable, I suppose. But the more it gets into popular culture and the more it sort of becomes a sort of titillating thing, the more I think it spreads this kind of idea of the trans gay man, which is,
I interviewed Ray Blanchard years ago. I'm speaking to him again soon for the podcast. I interviewed him for a magazine article and asked him if there is a female counterpart to autogynephilia, and he said no, but there is this thing where it's not that women are turned on by the thought of being a man; it's that the women are turned on by the thought of having sex as a gay man.
yes,
Which is subtly different.
Yeah,
but
I can see that.
But probably is what's happening on Grindr. I mean, do these women? How can you tell that they're trans? Is it just from the video, from the photos, or is it from?
It's much harder
do they
to
say
tell
so?
going that way around.
Yeah.
I mean, a friend of mine said he was once scrolling through and saw pictures, and it was this guy with his back to him, and he thought, "Oh, he looks okay." And then the next picture was the front, and it was double mastectomy scars.
Oh, okay.
I was like, "Whoa, okay."
Yeah.
But I think there's quite a lot of, from what I hear, again, there's quite a lot of entitlement of you'll be talking to the person and then they'll go, "Oh, just by the way, I'm a trans gay man." It's like, well, hold on, I think you should have said that before, or and then it puts you in a situation where you think, well, if I object or if I suddenly cool off, I'll be thrown off. So yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I wish someone would write a book about it, really go into it, autoandrophilia or whatever you want to call it. Again, a lot of this seems to come from Japan, like the anime stuff. There's, a lot of their teenage girls read these little comic books full of teenage boys getting it on. It's
this is
very peculiar.
Helen Joyce and I did a podcast about this recently about fan fiction, and there's very weird insights into female sexuality which are not always apparent. So you said that gay men are generally confused by this. Is this does this work? Are there some gay men who are like, "Oh, okay"? I guess
not that I've heard of. I mean, when you see occasionally people on Twitter, the sort of women who claim to be trans gay men will say, "Oh, plenty of men fancy me, and plenty of men come on to me," and you just think, well, when they know, well, then that the person's pretty obviously bisexual or straight. It's sort of, but if it is happening, then I think it's probably quite a minority interest. And also, it's the direct reverse of the situation going the other way, because you think, well, actually, I'm more worried about the woman in that situation, and whether she knows what she's getting into, and the danger she's putting herself in a weird way. So it's a really baffling thing, and I really would like to see somebody tackle it.
I heard from Eliza Mondegreen when she came on the show that there is a phenomenon now of straight men who will go on Grindr or similar apps and will seek out trans identified females for sex.
Yeah. This doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, and you can, I mean, if it's as many as 1 in 8, it's not going to be that hard to find them, is it? So you can see why they would do such a thing.
It's the old, Valerie Solana's quote about, men will do anything to get their end away. There are plenty of men like that, and that doesn't surprise me in the slightest,
Yeah, and these poor women, it sounds like they're incredibly annoying, like tattling to the Grindr authorities and so on, but also they are basically just really deluded.
Yes.
And stupid and taking risks and all of this.
Those things,
they've been led to believe things which are completely false.
Oh yeah, I mean the sort of strange idea they have about sort of cute gay men and gay couples and all that kind of thing. It's like, oh, come on, still men, with all the things that involves. um, um, be careful. I mean, I think that kind of fetishization of sort of cuddly gay men as well probably has kicked off some of this as well. It's like, I mean, a friend of mine who's quite famous, is him and his partner and their dog were sort of like they discovered that there were various sort of little groups of women sort of following them and I mean literally following them, taking pictures of them and sort of fantasizing about their relationship. Like, okay, it's very odd. I mean, the grass is always greener, I suppose. People think, you know, oh, the other sex, the other sexuality must be having a better time than I am. And it's never normally the case, I don't think.
Yeah, and maybe some of these women are being really wound up by. I mean, do they skew young? Would you say?
I think so, yeah, that seems to
Yeah,
be, yeah. I mean, in all sexual things, I think they always skew young anyway, I
I
guess,
suppose because
because,
young people are
yeah, people,
hornier.
people just lose their, a lot of us lose our interest after a while. Um, but yeah, it does seem to be, and it does seem to be being encouraged by all the other LGBTQ plus stuff that's going on.
Yeah, and probably quite a heavy dose of mental illness. I mean, it's an interesting area of the weirdness of female sexuality is so interesting to me because it can be really weird, like really weird, and but because women aren't physically threatening really to men or to almost anyone, it kind of goes unremarked upon. And normally, the sort of weird sex stuff that women are into also it doesn't really impose on other people.
No, it's not antisocial.
No. So things like,
Yeah,
the woman who falls in love with the Eiffel Tower or whatever, that
yeah,
like that's a real
yeah,
thing. That's a fetish that
yeah,
women
yeah,
have
yeah,
sometimes where they'll
yeah. I
fall in
remember
love with
that. Yeah,
inanimate objects.
yeah.
Um, I mean, probably the most dangerous example of this, but normally for the woman, is when women hybristophilia. Have you heard that term?
What's it called? Sorry?
Hybristophilia. It's I
Mm.
can't remember what it literally means, but it's basically a fetish for criminals.
Oh God, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
when women will write letters to serial
yeah,
killers in prison and
yeah,
and things like that, um, I'm sure drives a fair bit of the true crime genre.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, and arguably, it's kind of a more extreme version of normal female sexuality in the sense that women being attracted to a kind of tough guy
yeah, yeah.
is not abnormal at all,
No,
but they're
no.
taking it to
Yeah, I
a
mean,
pathological extreme.
I knew a woman who was a friend of mine who, constantly sort of threw herself at really, really bad men, and it was crazy because and I think it's obvious, but I think there is a lot of lack of self worth in that. It's like, well, I'm only worth this person, and there you go. But yeah, I think I mean, like you say, that weirdness is fascinating. I mean, I remember years ago, those Nancy Friday books. Do you remember those?
Rings a bell. Remind me.
She got women to write in with their fantasies or whatever to her magazine in the 70s. So this was the kind of book that was always passed around at school, between all the kids sort of passing it, dog-eared copies around to each other. And it was full of weird, wild and wonderful stuff. Um, but again, you think of the male version of that, it would be horrible. But the female version was like, oh, okay, quite sort of
Well,
fascinating.
sometimes the male version is just again weird, but
Yeah,
but when men have weird paraphilias, yeah, I mean, again, I suppose they end up being more remarked upon. They're more possibly more publicly known. I mean, not always. I remember reading a little while ago about some that furries is basically a sex thing entirely, and it's also like 70% of furries are gay or something like that. It's mostly a gay male subculture, with some straight men and basically no women, except that I read this very cute article I found on the internet a little while ago, the women who go to furry conventions as a completely non-sex thing just because they find it fun
right, right,
and have no idea what's going on, which
right, okay.
I found very endearing. But yeah, I mean, it's not like that's not antisocial, but it does seem to be. Yes, the sexes seem to really bifurcate when they're being weird sexually. It's quite rare. for there to be any kind of common ground. And yeah, I mean, autogynephilia now has become better known. When Ray Blanchard was first writing about it, it was
Yeah, it's odd because I mean, it's one of those things where people 40, 50 years ago seem to have more of an idea about it, and we've lost it. So people of my parents' generation were always like, oh, he dresses up in women's clothes and gets off on it. They knew, that and I think as I was growing up, what I saw of what was becoming known as trans was that there was always this thing of saying, oh, well, it's not sexual. And because we all like thinking different things to our parents and because it seemed quite progressive and nice, I sort of took that on board. And then as this stuff got more and more out into the open, it was obvious that for a large cohort of that population, it is obviously very sexual and they are getting a kick out of it. And again, it's one of those things that your grandparents knew better than we do. And we've sort of forgotten and we have to learn it all over again.
Yeah, you're right. And that happened, yes, the emergence of the trans movement really occurred at the same time as the curious disappearance of cross-dressers
Yes.
in like the
Yeah.
cultural imagination.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember the last cross-dresser that I saw on TV would be, there was a guy in EastEnders in about 2015, 2016, a married guy. And that was all couched, in that sort of pamphletty, researched way that soaps are. Was all, oh, it's not sexual. I just feel that when I'm Christine, I can let all these, I feel like I can cope with anything and all this sort of thing. It's like, really? And the wife was expected to put up with it and to understand. And, if anyone that pushed back was a bad person, all that kind of flannel.
There was this really funny Reddit post that Mary Harrington shared with me recently of a guy who had come out to his wife as trans and had told a sort of trans support subreddit about her response. And her response was just completely iconic. She was basically like, no, I don't accept this. She just went and had a nap and then woke up and just like refused to even like talk about it, whatever. She was like, no. And he was dumbfounded. Like, what do I do about this?
Yeah.
Because the expectation, yes, is that the women have to
I mean, it's like
participate.
this spousal veto thing
Yeah,
that Keir Starmer's going to get rid of, apparently.
yeah, I'm
I
sure.
mean, it's just, it's just, I know a bit about feminism, obviously, but, being a sort of, fairly intelligent man of a certain age. But I never saw myself as a feminist. I don't think men really can be feminists because I think it's a women's political movement. I think you can be allies in that dreadful word. And feminism is so split over so many different perspectives now. It's, you can't pick one out and say, oh, well, that's it. But it's like you don't have to be to notice the incredible sexism of this stuff. It's just so blatant, this spousal veto thing. It's like, well, hold on. That means you're taking away the wife's ability to say no to this? Where are you getting that from? If it's not from a sexist place. And, the sports stuff and everything. It's just, it's mind-boggling to me. I still can't get my head around it that people are fine with that. It's so wrong. It's so obviously wrong.
Many of you will know that Christianity is a subject of fascination for me, and the role of Christianity in shaping the modern world is a theme I return to again and again on the podcast. My view is that we really can't understand the world or ourselves without getting to grips with it, which is why I'm very glad to point you towards a new online course called 321. It's an introduction to Christianity that's imaginative, thoughtful, engaging. It assumes absolutely no prior knowledge. It's presented by the wonderful Glenn Scrivener, who has been a guest on the MMM podcast previously, and I've also been a guest on his show. Glenn presents 8 video-led sessions which are based around some beautiful animated stories that illustrate the Christian message. You can check it out for free at 321course.com/MMM. Just enter your email, choose a password, and you're in. There's no spam, there's no fees. Just visit 321course.com/MMM. Going back to the gay men's response to this, to what extent do you think that sort of thing has cut through? Like the sport thing. My husband said this years ago, actually, that before turf-free was making any cultural inroads, that sport will be the thing because it's so like visually obvious to people that you can't. Complete normies will find this shocking. Do you think that that sort of the ways that this in which this is affecting women? Do you think that has
Cut
resonated
through
with
to
gay
gay
men?
men?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no, no, it hasn't at all. I think honestly, you see sort of gay men from those big gay institutions, charities, whatever, talking about this, and they will do an eye roll, or they will, when they, they sort of go, "Oh, your legitimate concerns," and all that kind of thing. I think I saw a thing on Sky News the other week where Jean Hatchett, who's a feminist campaigner, was talking about something to do with trans, and they had someone from Pink News or something like that there. Oh, he was a drag queen. Oh, yeah, it was a drag queen called Crystal, and she was talking about the very basic stuff about sports and women's shelters, all that kind of thing. And he was, giving it. He was on one side of the screen doing the eye roll and honey, that kind of thing. And it's like it just doesn't get through. And I think what it is that particularly among a particular kind of gay culture and gay male culture, it all takes place socially in a kind of nightclub setting, where everyone's kind of like woo and loved up and everyone's having a good time and just relax and live and let live and doesn't she look fantastic and doesn't he look great and that kind of thing. And there's that world, and then there's the real world in which life is lived and politics happens. And I think a lot of gay men live in that first world and can't even contemplate, the reality of women's embodied existence, if you like. I think it just doesn't occur to them. We come back to that classic thing where we get trans-identified men who want to use women's toilets because they're afraid of straight men in men's toilets. It's like, well, surely it would occur to gay men, you think, to clock that and think, well, hold on, why are we putting that all onto the women in this situation? Why do they have to put up and shut up with these men coming in? Why aren't we doing something about it? I've never once seen anybody ever suggest that men shouldn't hassle trans-identified men in the gents. It's never even suggested. As if it would be, it would be impertinent to ask. It would be crazy to ask, because men are just so awful. We couldn't possibly do that. We couldn't ask them to do anything like that. But women, it's just, it's just accepted. They just have to stand in the queue with Eddie Izzard. No, sod off.
Eddie Izzard is a great example of this phenomenon, right? Where he was like a apparently happy crossdresser, for years, and he had this.
He said he was,
and he had this great line when someone would say, "Why are you wearing a woman's dress?" and he'd say, "It's not a woman's dress; it's my dress."
Yeah.
And then now he's fully transitioned, and all of that seems to be forgotten.
Yeah. So it's very odd because it's like he seems to be one of those people that just follows the zeitgeist. So whatever's going on around him, he just regurgitates. And he started saying things like, "Oh, I knew I was trans when I was 5." Like, really? What?
Well, he's trying to imitate there, isn't he, the homosexual, transsexual life narrative. Rather, because if that desire appeared during puberty, then that would suggest that it was a sex thing.
Yeah.
Which it is.
Yeah, that's
But he
true,
doesn't want to say that,
No, you're right, And it's also, again, you'd think with gay men that they'd notice that this is so reductive in terms of sex stereotypes that, I felt like a girl. Well, in what way do you feel like a girl? Because you were curious, because you were compassionate, because you wanted to do something creative? That doesn't make you a woman. It makes you a creative man. This stuff, it just completely boggles my mind still, because as I was growing up, and I was quite creative and all those things, and I was getting sort of not hassle, but comment on this quite a lot of the time as I was growing up, and it annoyed me, because I just didn't and still don't see why these things get categorized around the sexes. So for gay men to start getting off on, supporting that just seems crazy to me.
So one of the things that you write about, and which is, I think, one of the most concerning elements of this phenomenon, is the medicalisation and ultimately sterilisation, and I would say surgical mutilation of gender non-conforming children, most of whom will probably grow up to be gay or lesbian. Has that cut through to gay men as an issue that we're seeing
Again, it doesn't
basically?
seem to be.
Yeah.
I think it has a bit. It's getting there, but I think it's so difficult when all the groupthink is going one way, that it's all coming top down from Stonewall and the LGBTQ plus consortium and all those kind of people. And in America, you've got those huge organisations like GLAAD and all those kind of things. They're all coming down very much on the trans angle. I think what's happened is that it's a bit like the lobotomy furor of 50, 60 years ago, that there's been that kind of medical malpractice and that level of scandal and wrongness, that it's very, very hard for people to pull out of it. Because you're asking them to confront that the whole system has failed across so many different institutions. And also, you're asking them to face up to the complicity of what they've been involved in. So if they have to come round to the idea that, oh my God, I've been supporting the surgical mutilation of young homosexual people, that is a hell of a thing for them to get their head around. And this is why I think it might take decades before we actually, if we ever do come out of this, because I think there's a whole generation or two of people who have supported this so much and so openly, particularly now in the era of the internet and receipts, which is another problem, that going back on it will be hard. On the other hand, you have things like, just post-Cass, you had Ruth Hunt, who is the former CEO of Stonewall, who was the one that took it down the trans path. She came out very mea culpa, saying, I listened to the experts, I was the victim of a false doctrine and everything. That little trickle now seems to have dried up again. Nobody else seems to have come out. Wes Streeting, obviously, that was a big one. One thing I have noticed, which I think is quite interesting, is that some of the most ardent headbangers for this stuff have started saying stuff like, the debate is toxic on both sides.
Yeah.
And although that's infuriating, it's a step. Because it used to be, shut those sodding women up.
Yes.
It was like when Nicola Sturgeon she wasn't saying that, a year ago, 2 years ago, she wasn't saying it was toxic on both sides. She was saying, you are not valid. You sort of unfunded campaigners of, of like 30 years, work in women's refuges. You're somehow homophobic, racist and sexist, or whatever she said. But now her, Keir Starmer, a couple of the media ones have started saying that both sides stuff. And I think that is a potential way, at the very beginning of a reverse ferret, that when you start saying it's both sides, you're at least acknowledging that there is an issue with trans activists. So hopefully just keep pushing that. But as I say, particularly with the institutions, maybe not with the people on the ground, but if you're a clinician, a therapist, a teacher who's been sort of facilitating this, or a parent, this is a parent that's thought, I'm being supported on all this by all these institutions. My kid has come to this with me and I'm putting them through it. My God, that's going to be, that's the worst possible thing. I mean, there's no good way out of that for anyone. So these are the stumbling blocks, and I think it's going to be a tough journey.
We have come a very long way. I mean, since Julie Bindel was basically the only person writing about any of this stuff, certainly in the media, there's been an enormous change, and that you can very happily write about this in places as mainstream as the Times. And the Cass Review has been a big
Yeah,
deal. You know, that J.K. Rowling's intervention has been
yeah,
a big
that's true.
deal.
Yeah, yeah.
I am nevertheless worried about Labour, because the problem is that they contain some real ideologues,
Yeah,
and
they do.
yes, Wes Streeting came out being sort of tentatively supportive of the gender critical position,
Yeah,
and yet Rosie Duffield continues to be be ostracised within the
exactly. Yeah,
party,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and like to a shocking degree.
yeah, yeah,
And you think, if that's how they treat,
yeah,
the kind of sole female
yeah.
turf within the Labour Party.
Yes.
Um,
Open one, I might add. Yeah,
yeah,
open. There are lots
yes,
of others.
indeed,
Yeah, yeah,
indeed,
yeah.
yeah, and true for other parties as
But I
well.
think, and I don't know if you saw, but Starmer, I think yesterday gave an interview where he said, "Well, I'm going to end the culture wars on day one of my
Okay,
administration." And
that's quite
so, like,
sinister,
well,
doesn't it? I know he doesn't mean
yeah,
it this way, but it does
yeah,
sound like he's
well,
just bang, bang,
yeah.
bang.
Well, how are you going to do that?
Yeah,
You're going to
yeah,
make everyone shut up about this? I don't think so.
yeah, yeah.
And if you carry on with it, we know from the SNP where this leads. It leads to a, a disaster of career destroying proportions, and people won't put up with it. And this calm down dear attitude of Starmer's, it's sort of I mean, he's such a strange figure anyway. I can't get my head around him. It's like, what does he want power for? I mean, I think Rishi Sunak is a bit like that. You just think, well, why did you want this job so much? You haven't done anything. And Starmer is such a odd character. I mean, there was a thing in the Telegraph yesterday saying, all Keir Starmer's dangerous left-wing opinions. It's like, yeah, but he's also got about the same amount of completely reverse opinions.
I think a lot of what he says, this is true for lots of politicians, and particularly true on trans, is basically just he doesn't care, especially. It's just whatever seems politically salient in the moment. So people like that could definitely, and you did see this. You mentioned this kind of trickle. You did see this post Cass review. Some people who are hypersensitive to the right thing to say socially,
Yeah, yeah,
realizing that maybe this wasn't the right thing to say socially anymore.
yeah.
So sometimes things can change quite quickly with those people.
Yeah, I mean, one of my hopes, although it's maybe a forlorn hope, I don't know, is that I remember when Labour got back into power in '97. I mean, it's a very different country now, obviously, so I may well be wrong about this. But one of the things that was quite interesting about then was that a lot of sort of unsayable opinions started to become sayable again because they weren't necessarily associated with the Tories anymore. That certainly in the cultural sphere, everything kind of unclenched. There'd been, I'd sort of grown up in my sort of teens and 20s with that, the Tories, kind of attitude of the whole of comedy and culture and stuff like that. And suddenly it kind of loosened up a bit. So we had, particularly in the noughties, it was kind of, people were saying, doing all manner of things, and it was all done in a spirit of fun and nobody particularly cared. So maybe something like that might happen again. But then again, you look at America when Biden has got back in, and has that stopped any of that stuff? No. I think it is a very different situation, actually. But maybe we'll see a bit of that. I don't know.
What Labour are quite likely to do on trans is do things like the spousal veto you mentioned. They can do various legislative things if they have a massive majority, which they are probably going to. The thing is, though, that when the Conservatives are back in power or form a government,
Yeah,
they can just reverse that. And this is
they can, but yeah,
this is the nature of primary legislation.
yes.
And the
Although the Tories are terrible at reversing Labour
well,
legislation.
that's what I was going to say, that they
Yeah,
could have
yeah,
done that this whole 14 years. I mean,
yeah,
that they have done, and people within the Conservative Party like Kemi Badenoch and so on,
yeah.
they've done a good job of holding the
Yeah.
line and of
Yes.
not going any further,
Yeah.
but they haven't reversed anything.
No.
And
No.
actually, there are still crucial pieces of legislation which are still on the books, which they've
Yeah.
never even murmured about
Never even
changing.
considered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that constant battle of getting that ideology generally seeping in all its multivariate forms, and keeping it out. And I think a lot of the Tory parliamentary party, particularly, take the attitude that's kind of beneath them, and it's déclassé, and it's a terribly non-new social thing, a culture war, you know. So you have like, you know, back to Starmer saying that thing about, you know, I think the British people are very tolerant and live and let live and all this sort of thing. And you think, well, I'm not really live and let live about surgical mutilation of gender non-conforming teenagers. I can't really be tolerant about that. I don't, call me old-fashioned, but, you know, no. And I think that if he thinks he can, you know, put an end to the Tory culture wars, whatever they are, when the Tories would gladly not pay attention to any of this stuff unless they were pushed, and facilitated a lot of it, then I think he has got another thing coming. I think that, as with a lot of things, that, you know, the shine, such as it is, will fall off the massive majority Labour government pretty damn quickly, because they're not really addressing any of the massive other problems. So I'm sort of perversely kind of looking forward to it in a sort of nerdy political way, even though I'm not looking forward to it from any other angle.
The episode is not over. There is another maybe 30 minutes of content, but it is behind a paywall. If you would like access to that content, if you would like to show support for the show, paid subscriptions are what keep it on the road. Allow me to pay my producers, put food on the table, all that important stuff. The extended version of the podcast is available at my Substack, louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can also find, as I say every week, bonus episodes, extended episodes, the MMM chat community, all of this. Please sign up for a paid subscription. It makes such an enormous difference to my ability to keep producing the podcast and grow it even bigger, produce more episodes, all that good stuff. There are other ways that you can show your support for the show as well. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can like us on YouTube. You can tell your friends and family how much you like the show. If you find it valuable, all of these things make an enormous difference to our ability to keep making it. Thank you so much.